What if it actually works out? Everything that you wanted to have done in life, it was just done for you automatically. And so you're standing there with all of these accomplishments and feeling accomplished at that for everything that you've done for yourself, for other people, for the world, whatever it may be. What happens then? What do you do from there? A lot of people who sell their companies in particular and materialize and have all this money spend it for a while and then maybe they become depressed, right? That's like a very common trend that we see, especially in like the tech sector, right? There's a lot of money involved and it materializes in that way. And maybe they solved one or two problems, but at the end of the day, they still have maybe a lot longer to live and they're just not happy. Another example is music artists. They love making music and they produce a lot of it. They're really good at it. They have an impact on people, and that's their measurement of, it all working out for them because they've always wanted to do that, right? But they might commit suicide for whatever reason. They might take drugs. So, what happens when you kind of get into this scenario and everything is all right, but what happens after it and how do you get to the point and what can you do to make things work out for yourself? So, let's talk about it. So, the first thing is you need to recognize the game of life. This is the game of life, right? Everything is not static. Everything's very dynamic, right? Everything kind of comes and goes at you, and you need to choose, whatever path that you think might get you the best result. Usually, I would like to think that everyone wants to improve in some sort of way, but obviously, you might be content with your scenario, and so contentness is the core of the game of life. I think personally is how content are you with your situation and the people around you, and do you want to go further in this sort of game along your path, sort of thing, right? And so, how content you are really matters a lot because that will depend on how motivated are you to achieve a goal, how motivated are you to help other people, or are you motivated in general? So you're kind of balancing on the scales here. So. Um, a lot of the time we tend to measure this by materials. So materials by I mean probably the economy, right? Cash, or by emotions. How do I feel when I help other people? How do I feel doing this action? Because that contributes to my contentness. Materials and emotions are contributing to how content I am with the scenario. Because if I was not content with any materials or emotions, that probably wouldn't be very good, and you would probably just be stuck in your same scenario. Um, and you might just be content with the scenario and you don't need any other further materials and emotions that if you put them in a hierarchy, I guess, in this case, for example, if somebody is in the lower economic class, you might tend to think that person probably isn't as content as a person who is in the upper economic class. Well, that might not necessarily be the case because the person who is in the lower economic class might be just as content as the other person because they don't need anything else. For example, you take the I don't know, the northern part of the United States and compare that to the northern part of India, right? Some people there might be content, and some people in the other half of the hemisphere might not be content, right? It goes both ways. And so the question that a lot of the times we tend to think for ourselves is, do I have everything, right? Do I materialize and do I have everything like emotionally as well? How do I feel about this scenario in this life? And have I done everything? So it's kind of like two scenarios, right? It's one, the materials, right? So the do I have everything is the materials, and then have I done everything is the emotions. Have I done everything for myself, for other people in the world? So that's globally encompassing. Whereas I think we kind of develop this more of do I have everything materializing? And so like examples of this would be like, do I have a good family, right? Do I like my family? I hope so. Do I have the best house on the block or something like that? Have I made an impact by doing a philanthropy about things that I care about? Um, have I done everything for my family, right? And so it kind of goes both ways whenever you think about a subject or a topic. It could be like an organization, it could be a material, it could be a family, which is kind of both of those things encompassing, right? So we kind of have to think of the game of life in terms of contentness, I think. And so an example of this, kind of more so perseverance, but be not being content with what somebody tells you and trying to move forward from it. So an example of this is Stan Lee. So Spider-Man would have not been a thing if it wasn't, of course, for Stan Lee, but his perseverance in trying to get Spider-Man out in the first newspapers and comics. So uh, this is how the story goes, basically. So Stan Lee, he was just sitting there writing for, I think it was like a newspaper or a comic company. He was basically just writing, I guess, like the comic or like cartoon strip section, and his manager basically said, "Hey, we need something new, and we need it to be engaging because we're not doing so well right now, and we're going to go out of business." And so, Stan Lee, creative as he is, kind of just makes something up on the spot. He sees, I don't know, I think like a bug or a mosquito on the wall. He can't do Mosquito Man, so he does Spider Man. He just changes it to a spider, and his manager tells him that is a load of bullshit. I don't think it's going to do well, and so kind of throws it out the window. And Stanley is all sad because he thinks it could actually work. So he's kind of really pursuing the sort of Spider-Man thing, but obviously he can't if somebody higher up kind of shuts him down. But in any case, he still puts it in the newspaper in the comic section, and it does extremely well. And so, of course, his manager comes back. He's like, "Oh my God, Stan, you know how I really like this sort of Spider-Man idea that you had." Obviously, he was not content when he first saw it, so obviously just trying to make it up to Stan, sort of thing. But in any case, Stanley was basically like, "Don't don't let it goes something like this. This is a paraphrase, but don't let an idiot tell you what to not believe in." So obviously his manager did not believe in this Spider-Man sort of idea, but Stan believed in it, and so he persevered that because he was not content with the scenario or the outcome that his manager was going to give him because he believed it has potential, long-term potential. So yeah, that's kind of like he pursued it anyways, and so that's basically wanting to have a scenario or a path where you can be more content and you can have an impact. So I guess the materialization was right? The materialization is the actual newspaper or comic itself, and have I done everything is the impact and legacy, I guess, that Stanley would have on the field of animation, comics, newspapers, like whatever it may be, that sort of subfield and area, right? So this is a perfect example of how he manifests the two sort of materialization, but then also contentness for himself and his emotions, right? I found this image recently. So the other thing is the world is yours, basically, right? You kind of hear this sort of cliche comment every now and again. Maybe it appears in a movie or it appears in like an animation or I guess like a speech of motivation, right? You live your dream life, right? You've accomplished this scenario for yourself where you're living your dream life, and you do the things you enjoy until you die, basically. And so that might come early, that might come later, but you have to acknowledge that there is, for most people at least, there's this sort of period where you kind of have all of your emotions lined up. They're all good. You're content with that, and you have all your materials lined up, and you're content with the materials that you have. So, what do you do? Are you still content doing everything like every single day the same? Well, you might be. Some people might be. Other people might not be. So that's kind of like a plateau into, I guess, for me, it would seem like it's a plateau into boredom or depression of some case. And, how I mentioned earlier, how there are people who sell their companies very early that are successful and young, um, and everything works out for them, but then they kind of plateau into this boredom sort of thing. So, like, examples are like, I don't know, this guy and this guy, right? Ring a bell, maybe. So the world becomes yours, but then you start to get maybe into trouble and start to do sporadic things because you are bored or depressed, or maybe you just want something to change because you have accomplished everything, right? So everything can work out, and that is a good thing, I believe, for sure. It is a good thing, but you shouldn't stop trying to do good in the world, I think, for sure. Um, I think that is like the core of it all, of trying to be content is doing good. And if you're, a bad, this is all subjective, right? Good, bad, evil, good. Um, Doing good in the world, I think, and typically it would kind of leave you out of this sort of boredom and depression line. So yeah, something I just want to encourage that I think is generally uh, pretty safe to say. So expecting failure is another thing. So you could go through all of this and everything will work out. But why do we expect things not to work out in general? I think we never expect one another or anyone in our class, the people at our school, the people in an office place, the workplace, people that we grew up with, to become that sort of like 1% of people that has an impact or has these real, I guess, like fulfilling of their emotions, fulfilling of their materialization, right? They fulfill these sort of two bars that we've talked about extremely quickly or just in some sort of way through their entire life. And that's because um, you need to be obsessed over the success that you will have in your particular area. But the hardest thing for most people is this one right here, is taking the action, right? So taking the action is the hardest thing. Definitely, even for myself, like trying to do something consistently every single day that will lead to a result is definitely the hardest thing about trying to succeed, right? But once you have that general idea of what you want to do, and you know you will be more content, you will have a higher use of your material. You will have a lot more materials, and you will be full of emotion. I think in this case is yeah generally harder to take the action than trying to understand what you want to do to become successful. And the issue with this is that you kind of plateau into sort of waiting until something happens. So I've talked about this before, but waiting until something happens versus actually taking the action and just keeping it on your to-do list is the most unproductive thing that you can do, and just wasting your years, especially if you are young, right? Waiting until something happens and not taking action and not looking forward for something to do that could benefit you in some sort of way. Yeah, it's like one of the worst things that you can do. And obviously, I make the fair points in case that some people might be content and so content at that that they might not want anything more, or maybe they cannot see anything for themselves in the future, and so they're content with what they have. And I think that is completely valid. But also, I cannot stand the people who, I guess, are thinking in that sort of way, because I definitely think that there is always a possibility for you to improve, or something that you can do that will help other people and yourself. But I have to respect both parties for sure in that regard. Like an example of this is like avid people who take action and everything works out for them is like the world's billionaire list. So this could be older people, younger people, whatever the case may be. Um, like these people are the top 1%. They obsess over the success of whatever it is that they're interested in, and they take action on it, and they never wait until something happens. They obviously, if you're taking action, you're not waiting. So yeah, seeking the truth about, I guess, how you can maximize your materials and maximize how content you are, and also maximize like your fulfilledness of your emotions, right? Is you need to I think like happiness is one of the bigger emotions that comes to mind when we think about um, how content we are, right? Happiness is kind of like adjacent pretty much to those two. So happiness versus the impact. Are you going to be happy if you do have an impact, or are you going to be bored and depressed if you don't have an impact, or you do have an impact, right? It's kind of like the four quadrants that we sort of have here. And there's also like sometimes like amongst researchers or scientists and stuff, there's like some things that are so unobtainable, or that we have no clue about, or in theory could not be possible, that they are forever not content with whatever impact that they have. So this could be like, I guess, like a theory of like living forever, or having the capability to control other people, or having the capability to control some sort of like unnatural phenomenon like death, or whatever it may be. They're just things that, as we know right now, and we know to believe based on science, and these people that contributed to these fields are not on they're unobtainable. These are things that are not currently possible, and may not ever be possible, right? um, so yeah, I think when you go and you start to seek out your, I guess, like full capabilities in terms of maximizing your contentness, obviously with respect to the materials and emotions, you need to think about happiness, impact, and what are your limitations when going about those two, right? I can't just say I'm going to be super content and successful when I figure out how to make everyone in the world live forever, and or I cure cancer or something like that, right? For right now, I mean, obviously we're making a lot of I guess progress on cancer research, but you get the general idea, right? So yeah, that's today's video that I want to talk about. Definitely check out. There's some videos on Stanley and how Spider-Man came to be. Definitely recognize that he's a very inspirational figure in that area. Didn't really watch any Marvel movies. I just saw this one video and thought it would be pretty useful and to talk about. So yeah.